Sarah Mitchell had always been different. Even as a child growing up in rural Montana, she possessed an unusual ability to remember everything she saw and heard. Her teachers called it a photographic memory, but Sarah knew it was more than that. She could recall conversations word for word, remember the exact layout of rooms she'd visited once, and notice patterns that others missed completely. By the time she turned 18, Sarah had already caught the attention of government recruiters. Her perfect score on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery and her exceptional performance on psychological evaluations made her an ideal candidate for intelligence work. The recruiters didn't tell her parents much, only that their daughter had been selected for a special government program that would serve her country well. Sarah disappeared into the world of classified operations at 19. For the next 15 years, she worked as a data analyst for a division so secret that even its name was classified. Her job involved processing intercepted communications, identifying potential security threats, and connecting seemingly unrelated pieces of information to prevent attacks on American soil. She was brilliant at it, possibly too brilliant. The problem began in 2003, when Sarah discovered something she wasn't supposed to see. While analyzing routine surveillance data, she stumbled across evidence of unauthorized surveillance operations targeting American citizens. The scope was massive, involving thousands of people who had no connection to terrorism or foreign threats. When she tried to report her findings through proper channels, her superiors told her to forget what she'd seen and focus on her assigned work. But Sarah couldn't forget. Her exceptional memory meant that every detail of the illegal operations remained crystal clear in her mind. She began to document what she'd discovered, creating detailed records of the surveillance programs, the people involved, and the innocent Americans being targeted. She hoped that someday the right person would ask the right questions, and she would have the evidence ready. That someday never came. Instead, Sarah found herself being reassigned to increasingly mundane tasks. Her security clearance was gradually reduced, and her access to sensitive information was limited. Her superiors claimed it was routine reorganization, but Sarah knew better. She was being pushed out because she knew too much. The pressure intensified when Sarah's immediate supervisor, Agent Harrison, began making subtle threats about her future with the agency. He suggested that people who couldn't adapt to changing priorities often found themselves in difficult situations. He mentioned other analysts who had experienced mental health crises and needed extended treatment. The message was clear: stay quiet or face consequences. Sarah tried to reach out to oversight committees and inspector generals, but her communications were monitored. Every email she sent was screened. Every phone call recorded. She realized that she was trapped within a system that she had once served faithfully, and now that same system viewed her as a threat to be contained. The breaking point came on a cold December morning in 2004. Sarah was called into a meeting with 3 people she'd never seen before. They introduced themselves as healthcare specialists and explained that her recent behavior had raised concerns about her mental stability. They had reports from colleagues suggesting she was experiencing paranoid delusions and might pose a risk to herself and others. Sarah protested, demanding to know who had made these reports and what specific behaviors they were referring to. The specialists exchanged glances and spoke in calm, measured tones about the stress of intelligence work and how it could affect even the most capable minds. They presented documents showing that she had been exhibiting signs of mental deterioration for months, though Sarah had never seen these reports before. Within hours, Sarah found herself being escorted to a secure medical facility operated by the government. The facility was called Pinewood Recovery Center, but it looked more like a prison than a hospital. High walls topped with barbed wire surrounded the complex, and guards checked identification at multiple checkpoints. Sarah was told she would be staying there temporarily, while doctors evaluated her condition and determined the best course of treatment. The intake process was humiliating. Sarah's personal belongings were confiscated, including a small notebook where she had recorded some of her observations about the surveillance programs. The staff explained that writing materials could be dangerous for patients experiencing paranoid episodes. She was given a standard hospital gown and assigned to a room with no windows and a door that locked from the outside. Dr. Elizabeth Crane, the facility's chief psychiatrist, conducted Sarah's initial evaluation. Dr. Crane had worked with intelligence personnel before and understood the unique challenges they faced. However, she had also worked closely with government officials who wanted certain problems to disappear quietly. During their first session, Dr. Crane explained that Sarah's condition was more serious than initially thought, and recovery would likely take years rather than months. The diagnosis was elaborate and specific. Sarah suffered from delusional disorder with paranoid features, brought on by prolonged exposure to classified information and the stress of her work environment. The doctor explained that Sarah's belief in widespread government surveillance of citizens was a classic symptom of paranoid delusion. Her exceptional memory, which had once been her greatest asset, was now being used to construct elaborate conspiracy theories that had no basis in reality. Sarah tried to explain that she wasn't delusional, that she had documented evidence of the surveillance programs, but her protests only seemed to confirm the diagnosis. Every attempt she made to describe what she'd discovered was recorded as further evidence of her mental illness. The more detailed her recollections, the more convinced the staff became that she was experiencing complex paranoid delusions. As weeks turned into months, Sarah realized that her situation was not temporary. The facility's treatment plan included heavy medication that made it difficult for her to think clearly, and therapy sessions designed to help her accept that her memories of illegal surveillance were products of a diseased mind. She was encouraged to focus on recovery and to stop dwelling on her work-related delusions. The other patients at Pinewood were a mix of genuine mental health cases and people like Sarah who seemed to have been placed there for reasons that had nothing to do with mental illness. There was Frank, a former NSA technician who claimed to have evidence of election fraud. Maria, an accountant who had discovered financial irregularities in defense contracts. David, a researcher who had questioned the safety data for a new military vaccine. All of them had been diagnosed with various forms of paranoid disorder. Over time, the medication and isolation began to take their toll on Sarah's mental state. The sharp clarity of thought that had made her so valuable as an analyst started to fade. She began to question her own memories, wondering if perhaps the doctors were right, and she had imagined the surveillance programs. The constant reinforcement from staff that her beliefs were symptoms of illness gradually wore down her confidence in her own perceptions. By 2006, Sarah had been transferred to the maintenance wing of the facility, a section reserved for patients who were considered stable but unlikely to ever be released. The maintenance wing operated more like a long-term care facility than a hospital. Patients were expected to help with basic tasks around the building, and in return, they received more freedom of movement within certain areas of the complex. Sarah was assigned to work in the facility's administrative offices, where she helped with filing, data entry, and other routine tasks. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone who had once analyzed the most sensitive intelligence in the world was now filing paperwork for a psychiatric facility. But the work kept her mind occupied and gave her a sense of purpose, even if that purpose felt hollow. The years blended together in the maintenance wing. Sarah watched new patients arrive, go through the same process she had experienced, and eventually either leave or join the long-term population. She noticed patterns in who stayed and who left, but she had learned to keep such observations to herself. Expressing too much insight into the facility's operations was seen as a sign that her paranoid tendencies were returning. Her family had long since stopped visiting. Her parents, now in their 70s, had been told that their daughter's condition was severe and that contact with the outside world could be harmful to her recovery. They sent letters occasionally, but these were screened by staff and often contained suggestions that Sarah focus on getting well rather than dwelling on past events. By 2010, Sarah had become invisible within the system. She was a long-term patient who caused no trouble, helped with daily operations, and rarely spoke about her past delusions. Her file was thick with documentation of her mental illness, but thin on any real treatment progress. She had been written off as a case that couldn't be helped, but could be managed indefinitely. The facility's records showed that Sarah Mitchell, former intelligence analyst, had suffered a complete mental breakdown and now lived in a permanent state of managed psychosis. According to her official diagnosis, she believed she had once worked for the government in a classified role and had discovered evidence of illegal surveillance operations. These delusions were so firmly entrenched that she couldn't be convinced of their unreality, but medication kept them from causing aggressive behavior. What the records didn't show was that Sarah's mind, despite years of medication and psychological manipulation, had never completely surrendered. Deep inside, protected by layers of learned compliance and medicated fog, she still remembered everything. She remembered the surveillance programs, the evidence she'd gathered, and the way she'd been silenced. She also remembered that somewhere in the world, there were people who knew the truth about what the government was doing to its own citizens. She held on to the hope that someday, someone would come looking for her. Someone who knew that Sarah Mitchell had been more than just another mentally ill patient. Someone who understood that her disappearance into the mental health system hadn't been an accident or the result of job-related stress. It had been a deliberate act to silence a witness to activities that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. As Sarah entered her 8th year in the maintenance wing, that hope was the only thing that kept her true self alive beneath the layers of institutional conditioning. She didn't know that her hope was about to be answered in the most unexpected way possible. She couldn't have imagined that her salvation would come from someone who understood exactly how dangerous people disappeared into systems designed to erase them completely. Robert Kellerman had spent 32 years working for the Central Intelligence Agency before retiring to a quiet farm in Virginia. His career had taken him through the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the early years of the War on Terror. He had seen governments rise and fall, witnessed covert operations that would never appear in history books, and learned that the line between protecting democracy and undermining it was often thinner than most people realized. Retirement hadn't slowed down Robert's mind. At 68, he remained sharp, curious, and deeply concerned about the direction his country was heading. He spent his mornings tending to his vegetable garden and his afternoons researching through networks of former intelligence officials who shared his concerns about government overreach. These informal networks existed outside official channels, composed of retired agents who had maintained their security clearances and their commitment to protecting the Constitution. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in March 2012. The caller was James Wright, a former colleague from the agency who now worked as a private investigator specializing in missing persons cases. James had been contacted by an elderly couple in Montana whose daughter had vanished into the government system 8 years earlier. They had received official notices that their daughter was receiving treatment for a mental health condition, but they had been unable to visit her or get detailed information about her status. The daughter's name was Sarah Mitchell, and according to her parents, she had been working in some kind of classified government position when she disappeared. The family had initially accepted the official explanation that Sarah was receiving treatment for work-related stress, but as years passed without any improvement or communication, they began to suspect that something was wrong. They had hired James to help them locate their daughter and determine her actual condition. James explained that his investigation had hit several dead ends. Official records showed that Sarah Mitchell was receiving long-term treatment at a facility called Pinewood Recovery Center, but the facility operated under strict privacy guidelines that prevented him from obtaining details about her condition or treatment. What troubled James most was that Pinewood appeared to be funded entirely by government contracts, yet it claimed to be a private medical facility. Robert listened carefully as James described the limited information he had been able to gather. Pinewood Recovery Center was located on a secure compound in rural Maryland, about 2 hours from Washington, D.C. The facility specialized in treating government employees who had experienced work-related mental health crises. Patients at Pinewood were typically individuals who had held security clearances and needed specialized treatment that took their background into account. Something about the case triggered Robert's instincts. During his career, he had encountered several situations where individuals with sensitive knowledge had been quietly removed from their positions and placed in secure facilities. These cases were rare, but they followed a consistent pattern. The individual would be diagnosed with a mental health condition that discredited their credibility, placed in a facility where their access to the outside world was strictly controlled, and gradually forgotten by the system that had once valued their contributions. Robert agreed to help James investigate Sarah Mitchell's case, but he approached it with the caution of someone who understood how dangerous such inquiries could become. He began by using his contacts within the intelligence community to gather background information about Sarah's work history and the circumstances of her hospitalization. What he discovered confirmed his worst suspicions. Through unofficial channels, Robert learned that Sarah had worked as a data analyst for a highly classified surveillance program that had been operating without proper oversight. The program had been shut down in 2005 following an internal investigation, but not before several analysts who had raised concerns about its legality had been quietly reassigned or dismissed. Sarah Mitchell's name appeared on a list of personnel who had been deemed security risks due to their knowledge of the program's activities. The more Robert investigated, the more convinced he became that Sarah had not suffered a legitimate mental health crisis. Instead, she had been targeted for removal because she possessed detailed knowledge of illegal surveillance operations. Her exceptional memory, which had made her valuable as an analyst, had made her dangerous as a potential whistleblower. Robert decided to visit Pinewood Recovery Center personally, but he knew that a direct approach would be impossible. The facility's security was too tight, and any official inquiry would likely trigger alerts that could make Sarah's situation worse. Instead, he developed a cover story that would allow him to get close enough to assess the facility and possibly make contact with Sarah. Using his connections in the healthcare industry, Robert arranged to pose as a consultant evaluating government-contracted medical facilities for compliance with federal regulations. His fictional consulting firm specialized in reviewing security procedures at facilities that treated personnel with security clearances. The cover story was plausible enough to get him through the initial screening process, but thin enough that it wouldn't survive detailed scrutiny. Robert's first visit to Pinewood in June 2012 revealed a facility that operated more like a minimum security prison than a hospital. The administrative staff was professional but evasive when asked about patient populations or treatment outcomes. They explained that patient privacy requirements prevented them from discussing specific cases, but they were happy to show him the facility's security procedures and general treatment areas. During his tour, Robert was struck by the number of patients who appeared to be functioning at a high level despite supposedly suffering from severe mental illnesses. Many of them were helping with facility operations, performing tasks that required significant skill and responsibility. These patients moved freely within certain areas of the complex and seemed to have been there for years rather than months. It was during his second visit, 3 weeks later, that Robert first saw Sarah Mitchell. She was working in the administrative area, efficiently organizing files and processing paperwork with a level of competence that seemed inconsistent with her supposed diagnosis. What caught Robert's attention wasn't her productivity, but the way she carried herself. Despite years of institutionalization, she moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had once operated in high-pressure, high-stakes environments. Robert arranged to return the following week, this time requesting to review patient files for his compliance assessment. The facility's administrator was reluctant, but eventually agreed to allow him limited access to anonymized records. Robert spent hours reviewing files, looking for patterns that might reveal the true purpose of the facility and the real status of its long-term patients. What he found confirmed his suspicions. A significant percentage of Pinewood's long-term patients had backgrounds in intelligence, defense contracting, or other sensitive government work. Their diagnoses followed similar patterns: paranoid delusions focused on government surveillance or corruption, onset typically following exposure to classified information, and poor response to conventional treatment. The consistency was too perfect to be coincidental. Robert also discovered that many of these patients had been admitted following security reviews rather than voluntary treatment seeking. Their files contained references to concerns about their reliability or potential for unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. The facility seemed to be serving as a dumping ground for government employees who knew too much and couldn't be trusted to remain silent. On his fourth visit to Pinewood, Robert decided to take a calculated risk. He had identified Sarah Mitchell's work schedule and knew that she spent her afternoons in the facility's records room, filing and organizing documents. He arranged to be in that area during her shift, ostensibly to review additional patient files for his assessment. When he encountered Sarah, he introduced himself as a compliance consultant and engaged her in casual conversation about the facility's filing systems. She was polite but cautious, clearly trained by years of institutional life to be careful about what she said to strangers. However, Robert noticed that her responses demonstrated sharp analytical thinking and exceptional attention to detail. As their conversation continued, Robert began to test Sarah's reactions to certain topics. He mentioned that his work sometimes involved reviewing cases where patients might have been misdiagnosed or inappropriately treated. Sarah's body language changed subtly at this comment, and Robert saw a flicker of hope in her eyes that she quickly suppressed. Robert then took an even bigger risk. He casually mentioned that he had once worked for the government and understood how stressful classified work could be for dedicated employees. Sarah's reaction was immediate and telling. For just a moment, her carefully controlled expression slipped, and Robert saw the intelligent, desperate woman beneath years of institutional conditioning. That evening, Robert spent hours reviewing everything he had learned about Sarah's case. He cross-referenced her work history with the timeline of the surveillance program that had been shut down in 2005. He examined the medical reports that had justified her initial hospitalization and found inconsistencies that suggested the diagnosis had been predetermined rather than based on genuine clinical assessment. Robert realized that he was looking at a case that went far beyond medical malpractice or bureaucratic incompetence. Sarah Mitchell had been deliberately disappeared by people who wanted to ensure her silence about illegal government activities. Her exceptional memory had made her too dangerous to ignore, but her status as a government employee had made it impossible to eliminate her through conventional means. The facility itself appeared to be part of a broader system designed to neutralize potential whistleblowers without the political risks associated with more direct action. By labeling them as mentally ill and placing them in secure medical facilities, the government could ensure their silence while maintaining plausible deniability about their treatment. Robert knew that exposing this system would require more than his word against official medical records. He needed concrete evidence of Sarah's true mental state and documentation of the facility's real purpose. He also needed to ensure that his investigation didn't trigger a response that would make Sarah's situation worse or create additional risks for other patients. Over the following weeks, Robert developed a plan to gather the evidence he needed while protecting Sarah and the other patients who had been similarly disappeared. He would need to document Sarah's actual mental competency, gather proof of the facility's true purpose, and build a case that could survive the inevitable government response when the truth came to light. The plan was dangerous for everyone involved. Robert knew that his former colleagues in the intelligence community would view his actions as a betrayal, potentially subjecting him to criminal prosecution or worse. Sarah would be taking an enormous risk by cooperating with him, as any discovery of their communication could result in her being transferred to an even more secure facility. But Robert also knew that Sarah Mitchell represented countless other government employees who had been silenced for trying to uphold their oath to the Constitution. Her case had become a test of whether the systems designed to protect democracy could be held accountable when they turned against the very people who served them most faithfully. As summer turned to fall in 2012, Robert prepared to take the first concrete steps toward freeing Sarah Mitchell from 8 years of wrongful imprisonment. He didn't know that his actions would eventually expose a network of similar facilities across the country, or that Sarah's case would become the key to understanding how far the government had gone to silence inconvenient voices within its own ranks. The breakthrough came on a cold October morning when Robert Kellerman made his 7th visit to Pinewood Recovery Center. This time, he had come prepared with a tiny recording device and a carefully planned conversation designed to document Sarah Mitchell's true mental state. He had spent weeks studying her schedule and identifying opportunities for private conversation without arousing suspicion from the facility's staff. Robert found Sarah in the facility's library, a quiet room where patients could read under minimal supervision. He approached her with a stack of compliance forms and asked if she could help him understand the facility's patient activity scheduling system. As they talked, Robert gradually steered the conversation toward more complex topics that would demonstrate Sarah's cognitive abilities. What happened next exceeded Robert's expectations. When he mentioned certain technical terms related to intelligence analysis, Sarah's responses revealed not only that her memory remained intact, but that her analytical skills had actually sharpened during her years of imprisonment. She had spent 8 years observing the facility's operations, identifying patterns in patient treatment, and documenting irregularities in her own mind, since she had no access to writing materials. Sarah told Robert about the other patients who had been placed at Pinewood for reasons that had nothing to do with mental illness. She had identified at least 15 individuals who showed no signs of the conditions they had been diagnosed with, all of whom had worked in sensitive government positions before their hospitalization. She had also noticed that certain patients received different medications than others, and that some seemed to be kept in medicated states that prevented them from thinking clearly. Most significantly, Sarah revealed that she had maintained detailed mental records of everything she had originally discovered about the illegal surveillance programs. 8 years of isolation and medication had not erased her memories of the evidence she had gathered. She could still recall specific dates, names, operational codes, and technical details that would be crucial for any investigation into the surveillance programs that had led to her imprisonment. Robert realized that he was sitting across from someone who possessed one of the most important collections of evidence about government wrongdoing in recent American history. Sarah's exceptional memory had preserved information that had likely been destroyed from official records years ago. Her forced silence had actually protected this evidence from being eliminated along with the programs that created it. After documenting Sarah's mental competency, Robert shifted his focus to gathering evidence about Pinewood's operations. Using his cover as a compliance consultant, he had gained access to administrative areas and patient records that revealed the facility's true purpose. He discovered that Pinewood was one of several similar facilities operated under government contracts specifically designed to house former government employees who posed potential security risks. The patient records revealed a pattern of diagnoses that seemed designed to discredit rather than treat. Patients who claimed knowledge of illegal government activities were consistently diagnosed with paranoid delusions. Those who attempted to maintain contact with the outside world were labeled as having poor reality testing. Anyone who questioned their treatment was seen as lacking insight into their condition and requiring additional therapeutic intervention. Robert also uncovered financial records showing that Pinewood received substantial government funding through a complex network of contracts and subcontracts designed to obscure the source of its support. The facility was essentially a black site disguised as a medical institution, allowing the government to indefinitely detain people without the legal protections associated with criminal prosecution or national security detention. Armed with this evidence, Robert faced a difficult decision about how to proceed. A traditional approach through official channels would likely result in the evidence being suppressed and Sarah being transferred to an even more secure location. He needed to build a case that could survive government attempts to discredit or silence it, while also ensuring that Sarah and the other wrongfully detained patients could be freed. Robert decided to approach Senator Patricia Collins, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who had earned a reputation for holding intelligence agencies accountable for constitutional violations. Senator Collins had previously investigated cases of government overreach and had the political standing necessary to demand answers from agencies that typically operated beyond public scrutiny. The meeting with Senator Collins took place in December 2012, in her private office after regular business hours. Robert presented his evidence systematically, starting with Sarah's background and qualifications, then documenting the circumstances of her hospitalization and the inconsistencies in her treatment. He provided audio recordings of his conversations with Sarah that demonstrated her mental competency, along with documentation of Pinewood's operations and patient population. Senator Collins was initially skeptical, having heard similar claims from constituents who genuinely suffered from mental illness or harbored conspiracy theories. However, as Robert presented his evidence, she realized that the case had all the elements of a major government scandal. The documentation was too detailed and consistent to be fabricated. And Robert's credentials gave him credibility that couldn't easily be dismissed. What convinced Senator Collins to act was Sarah's detailed recollection of the surveillance programs that had been shut down years earlier. The technical specificity of her memories, combined with her ability to connect seemingly unrelated pieces of information, suggested that she possessed genuine insider knowledge rather than paranoid delusions. Senator Collins had been investigating similar surveillance programs through her committee work and recognized references that wouldn't be known to someone without direct access to classified information. Senator Collins launched a discreet investigation through her committee staff, using their security clearances to verify aspects of Sarah's account without alerting the agencies that might try to interfere. The investigation confirmed that Sarah had indeed worked on highly classified surveillance programs and that concerns about the program's legality had been raised by multiple analysts around the time of her hospitalization. The investigation also revealed that several other analysts who had worked on similar programs had experienced mysterious career difficulties or health problems around the same time period. Some had been transferred to less sensitive positions, others had been forced into early retirement, and a few had been hospitalized for stress-related conditions. The pattern suggested a systematic effort to silence people who possessed evidence of illegal activities. In March 2013, Senator Collins made the decision to visit Pinewood Recovery Center personally, accompanied by committee staff and a court-ordered independent medical examiner. The facility's administrators tried to prevent the visit, claiming that patient privacy regulations prohibited unannounced inspections, but Senator Collins had obtained a federal court order that overrode these objections. The visit to Pinewood proved to be as revealing as Robert had predicted. The independent medical examiner conducted detailed assessments of Sarah and several other long-term patients, documenting their actual mental states versus their official diagnoses. The examiner found that most of these patients showed no signs of the severe mental illnesses described in their files, and that many appeared to have been maintained on medications that served no legitimate therapeutic purpose. Sarah's assessment was particularly dramatic. After years of being told that her memories of government surveillance programs were paranoid delusions, she was finally able to speak freely about her experiences with someone qualified to evaluate their credibility. The independent examiner concluded that Sarah showed no signs of mental illness and that her recollections appeared to be accurate memories rather than delusional thinking. The medical examiner also discovered that Sarah's treatment had included drugs typically used to impair memory and cognitive function, rather than medications designed to treat any diagnosed mental condition. The pattern suggested that her treatment had been designed to silence her rather than help her, raising serious questions about the facility's medical ethics and legal authority. Following the committee's investigation, Senator Collins held closed hearings with intelligence community officials to demand explanations for Sarah's case and the existence of facilities like Pinewood. The hearings revealed that several intelligence agencies had developed informal arrangements for dealing with employees who posed potential security risks, including placement in secure medical facilities that operated outside normal oversight mechanisms. The legal battle to secure Sarah's release took another 6 months, as government lawyers argued that her case involved classified information that couldn't be discussed in open court proceedings. However, the involvement of Senator Collins and the Senate Intelligence Committee created political pressure that eventually forced the agencies to negotiate a resolution. In October 2013, Sarah Mitchell was quietly released from Pinewood Recovery Center after 9 years of wrongful imprisonment. Her release came with conditions that prevented her from publicly discussing the specific details of the surveillance programs she had discovered, but she was free to return to normal life and pursue whatever career opportunities remained available to her. Sarah's readjustment to life outside Pinewood was difficult, but ultimately successful. She had to relearn basic skills like managing finances and navigating technology that had evolved during her imprisonment. More challenging was overcoming the psychological effects of years of being told that her memories and perceptions were symptoms of mental illness. Even after her vindication, she struggled with self-doubt and anxiety about whether her experiences had been real. Robert Kellerman helped Sarah during her transition, connecting her with support services and legal assistance. He also worked with her to document her experiences in a way that could help other victims of similar treatment while respecting the legal restrictions on her public statements. Their collaboration led to the identification of several other facilities operating under similar arrangements and the development of new oversight procedures for government-contracted medical institutions. The broader investigation triggered by Sarah's case eventually led to significant reforms in how intelligence agencies handle employees who raise concerns about illegal activities. New whistleblower protections were established, and procedures were put in place to prevent the misuse of mental health systems to silence potential witnesses to government wrongdoing. While these reforms didn't undo the damage caused to Sarah and others like her, they created safeguards designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. Sarah ultimately chose to work as an advocate for government accountability and whistleblower protection, using her unique experience to help others navigate the dangerous territory of challenging illegal activities within the national security establishment. Her exceptional memory, which had initially made her a target for silencing, became a powerful tool for exposing the methods used to suppress dissent within government agencies. The case also highlighted the important role that retired government officials like Robert Kellerman could play in holding their former employers accountable. Robert's willingness to investigate Sarah's disappearance demonstrated that institutional loyalty didn't require blind acceptance of wrongdoing, and that retired officials had both the knowledge and the responsibility to challenge abuses of power. Today, Sarah Mitchell lives quietly in a small town in Colorado, where she continues her advocacy work while maintaining the low profile necessary for someone who possesses detailed knowledge of classified programs. She has never fully recovered from the years of imprisonment and psychological manipulation, but she has found purpose in ensuring that her experience serves as a warning about the dangers of unchecked government power. The Pinewood Recovery Center was eventually shut down following the investigation triggered by Sarah's case, and several of its administrators faced professional sanctions for their role in the wrongful detention of government employees. However, Sarah knows that her case represented just one example of a much broader system designed to silence inconvenient voices within the government, and that similar facilities likely continue to operate under different names and oversight arrangements. Her story serves as a reminder that the most dangerous threats to democracy sometimes come not from external enemies, but from the very institutions designed to protect it. It also demonstrates that even in the darkest circumstances, there are individuals willing to risk everything to expose the truth and protect the rights of those who cannot protect themselves.